you. I'm really glad to be here today, and I'm really glad to, I can't see you all, but I'm glad to know that you all are here. Oh, now my computer wants to restart. Okay, perfect. My name is Megan Kuhlman, and I am the business librarian at Wichita State University. So I work a lot with business research. And let's see. So what's important about that is that in this presentation, I will be talking a lot about data sources, where to find information, a little bit less about how to analyze that information, excuse me, but I will talk a little bit about how the research fits into business planning and kind of the theory around it a little bit, and then talk quite a bit about information sources. And some of those sources are things that, a few of the sources I'll talk about are sources that we subscribe to at Wichita State, but I'm trying to focus this presentation mostly on freely available resources and those that are available through the public library. So if anyone is not in Wichita, your public library would also have these sources, and your local state university would also have the subscription resources. And if you are not affiliated with Wichita State, you can come into campus and access all of these materials from campus. So they are available to the public, which is why I am mentioning them. Some of them that are a little bit more important, even though it might be a little bit more tricky to access, you do have access as someone from the public, and you can download information and take it with you. But I'll try not to spend too much time on those resources, but just a little bit to give you an idea of what to expect. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to try to keep the chat open as well if you want to ask questions as we go through this. So let me get the chat open. Okay. All right, and let me actually put my contact information in the chat as well, because this presentation is hard for me that I could cover, but a lot of it will be, more relevant to your particular business situation. So I've tried to cover those that are going to be relevant to everybody who's in a startup position, but I welcome you to reach out to me personally for more information that's relevant to your specific situation. Outreach is a part of my job, so I'm really happy to work with all of you. So it's megan.kuhlman@wichita.edu. And you're more than welcome to reach out with me for a consultation that might be more specific to your business context. All right. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking mostly about where to find data to help you with your business planning process. And that's going to include industry trends, competition, the strengths and weaknesses of those businesses operating in a similar context, to help you kind of define your competitive advantage and what sets you apart from other businesses that are similar. And then importantly, identifying who is your target market. So of all the people who, obviously you want to sell your product to everyone in the world, but you have to be able to focus on a narrow subset in order to get started with marketing that's targeted. So who they are, what they're like, and where to find them. And I'll try not to talk too fast, but it is a lot to do in an hour, so let's get started. But actually, so yeah, one important thing to think about when market research, there's two different things that people mean when they say market research. And a lot of times what people are talking about is primary market research, where you actually go out and you gather that data yourself. Either you have surveys or interviews or focus groups with potential customers to really get into their head and see if your product or service is something that interests them, how to get them more interested. That's not what we're talking about today, though. What this presentation is about is what's called secondary market research, or either called desk research or library research. And that's making use of existing data that's already out there somewhere to get a sense of that current and future market. And it's important to remember that even though it's called secondary market research, it's actually the process that you want to do first, because primary research is very expensive, it can be, and it's very time consuming. So before you go out there and really try to find people to talk with you, you want to make sure that you've already looked at all of the information that you can that is that already exists out there that's available to you. So that way, when you go to find those customers, you know who to ask and you know what questions to ask that you wouldn't be able to find out otherwise. So that's just some background. And I'm actually going to switch over from the slides really quickly to take a look at a couple example business plans to give you a sense of when you're getting started, what information is really important and what you would want to be looking for. So I've got two examples here. And these come from a book series called the Business Plans Handbook that we do have in the library. And there's example business plans for just about every different type of business. So if you're interested in looking at those, you can definitely do that with the library. I don't know if the public library has these or not, but we definitely do. And there's hundreds of them. They come out every year, so it's a really helpful resource. This one's for a food truck, just looking at some different examples here. So we've got our executive summary. There's not a lot of research in there. That's what you're planning to do. Financial statement. But then this one in the company summary, there is a little bit of research going into the competition aspect of that. So looking at other similar food providers, who is your direct competition? So some somewhat indirect competition would be those brick and mortar restaurants if you're a food truck, and other food trucks that are in the same type of food would be your most direct competition. So knowing who they are and where they're at is important for any business. And then we've got some of that industry research, which is where we usually start with market research. This is pulling data from IBISWorld, and that is a database that our library subscribes to. So that's one that you would have to come into the library to look at, but I will demonstrate that one because it is, you'll see that it's used a lot in these business plans. It's really solid data, it's really well trusted, and it definitely makes you look like you've done your homework if you're pulling data from that source. So they know that street food is a $1 billion industry, and they have a percentage of that growth rate every year, which is a really important piece of information. And then again with competitors, who is their most direct competition, and what type of food that they're specializing in. Then what sets their business apart, that competitive advantage aspect. In this case, they're focusing on health food, and they have some data about what makes it healthy, and that none of their competitors are specializing in that type of choice. And then because they do know what they're specializing in, then they have a target market that they're looking at, middle and upper income market, particularly working students. And what I don't see here is the total number of people in that demographic group in this particular market area. And that's something, data that we could pull pretty easily. So that's something that I think is a bit of an oversight here that I would definitely add, my target market and the size of that target market. And then threats to success. This is something we can also often find through industry research. What does it take to be successful in that industry? And how are you planning to meet those challenges? And oh yeah, there's a little bit more in here. So pricing, that's another thing we can look at when we're doing competition research. Depending on the type of business, you might get a sense of how the price structure is set up in that industry and how your business will fit into that competitively. And then going back to the target market, how are you going to advertise to those people in your demographic area in a way that they respond to? So that's a little bit more of that consumer research. Then the other one I have here is for a service, pet daycare and boarding services, a local service. And we can see that there's some similar information here in their business summary. They do have research, so it's a different format. But again, they have this information of exactly how many dollars per year in the United States are people spending on this? How much is that market increasing every year? They're citing their data sources, which I like. And here they do actually have the size of their target market. So in the service area, there's approximately 45,000 households who own pets who would be a potential part of that market. But then they break it down further, the target market. So they're not just looking at every pet owner, but those who actually would want to board their pets, who don't like to leave their pets alone. So they're looking at people who travel, maybe older people. And they've got information about their competition here as well, that there's only a few pet sitters available that they can find on a popular website for that, and information about how they'll advertise. So we've got the products and services. Again, that's less research-based. That's more of your own business imagination. But then in the industry overview, they have data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics about the type of workers in their target market and how much that is increasing over the next 10 years. More data about who's owning pets, especially in 2-person or retired households. Yeah, so it kind of continues that way. Who is their target market? What is their most direct competition in the area? And how are they going to advertise? And some information about costs. So all of that is information that we can find in a secondary market research, pulling data from the research that already exists out there. So I know at KDBSC that there are people who can help you pull some of this data and help you make sense of it, but there's a lot that you can do on your own as well. So I'm going to start with industry research. So and basically I'm breaking this down into those 3 categories, and any time that I'm looking at business research of any kind, I think of it in these 3 pieces because it really helps me kind of break down what I'm looking for. So the industry research, which in a business plan often goes into your business summary, the company research, which is your competitive analysis, and that consumer research or market analysis. So when we're looking at industry research, some of the things that are really important to kind of keep an eye out for, especially if you are in a product, creating a product, looking at that supply chain. Who are you getting your materials from? Who are you selling it to? What are the activities related to that? Definitely, as we saw trends, the total number of sales, the growth rates, what does it take to start a business, those barriers to entry, as well as what it takes to be successful. What are some of the risk factors? Cost structure, what determines demand in that area? So what does it take to be competitive? Definitely your consumer base. So you might look at your competition. Who are they? What kind of market are they targeting? So that you can make sure you have a slightly different like niche market. So that's important to determine through the research. And then also market share, which is going to be more important for larger businesses. For smaller local businesses, that can be hard to determine. But if you're looking at entering an industry where 3 or 4 major companies dominate, then how much of that market could you realistically get a percentage of? And if it's $1 billion market, maybe getting 1% of that market is enough for you, but it's nice to be able to get that data. So I'm going to bounce around quite a bit in this presentation between the slides and the resources. But let me put this link in the chat for you really quickly, if I can get that back open. So this is a guide that I created with all of the different resources we'll be talking about today, as well as a lot more resources even than that. Excuse me. So everything that I'm going to be talking about is here on this guide. And so there are, as I mentioned, there's going to be some databases that are behind a paywall, and all of those are marked with a red lock icon, just to let you know those are ones you would have to come into the library to access. And those that are freely available are all indicated with a green lock, so you can kind of keep track easily that way. And I've tried to put as many free resources as possible into this guide. But I'm going to start on the industry and company research tab and take a look at IBISWorld, which I mentioned. This is our main database for industry research. It's got all of the different components that I just mentioned as being important. It is one that you would have to come into the library to access, but I definitely think it would be worth your trouble to do that. And it is a company that all they do is compile market industry research. They're really specialized, they're really good at what they do, And all of their reports are updated at least every 6 months, and sometimes for changing industries even more so. So I'm going to stick with my theme and go with pets, pet grooming and pet boarding as an industry, just to kind of show you what information you can find in these types of reports. So we've got our COVID-19 impact, which is kind of nice, very current, and we can see this is from January 2021. And one thing right here that I would pull your attention to, if you are not familiar with these NAICS codes, it's kind of technical. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but every industry has a code that is, it's North American Industry Classification Standards. And if you can find that number for your industry, it's really helpful, because then all of the different resources, you can search on that NAICS code and make sure you're finding information for that particular industry. Looks like we've got a question. Do they have information on rural community retail and business trends? Excellent question. Not in IBIS World. IBIS World is going to be looking more at the national level. So you would have to kind of draw those comparisons yourself and make that analysis. But in some of the resources we'll look at, they do have more detailed regional information. Okay, so industry at a glance. Some of the information we have here is, oh, it's not what I was expecting to look at. Maybe it's down here a little further. So here we have the supply chain information. What industries are we getting our materials from, and who are they selling it to? And these all link out to similar industry reports. It's telling us there's no major players. So this is an industry where small startup companies definitely have an ability to get started in that industry, and some basic information. If we go to industry performance, this is where we're getting that information about how it's expected to grow and the total number of revenue. So in this case, we can see at the start of the pandemic, revenue really crashed, then it went up, and now it's expected in the future to level off to its pre-pandemic success rate. Then information about what determines the demand here. So number of people who own pets, per capita income, and this is going to change depending on the industry. So it gives you a really good sense of what information you would want to look at and get data on in order to be able to fill out those parts of your business plan. Current performance, and a little bit more information about each of those. So we're getting data on why it's growing, how it's growing or not, and some really good data here from their own estimates in IBIS World, and also if they're getting data from outside sources, it will tell you where that data came from as well. So it's well documented. Consumer attitudes, the structure of the industry, and historical performance here. There's a lot. I'm going to skip over some things, but importantly, products and markets are really useful. So here we've got the supply chain again. But then within that industry, what products and services are the ones that they're the most of? So you might say, okay, well, 46% of that market is going to pet boarding. That's what I want to do. Or you might say, oh, actually, pet training is a pretty small part of that market. Maybe I could really make a break there. But that would be for the way that you analyze the data, but it's really helpful to have that knowledge and be able to talk about it with anybody who might help you grow your business. Total revenue, more information about kind of how that is broken down for each of the market segments. And then again with demand. So what is, who is the target market for that? In this case, 30 to 49-year-olds are 40% of that market. So you might say that's who I'm going to target. Or you might say, oh, it looks like a lot of people aren't targeting this age group. That's what I want to go for. But you have data to back up that decision. And here again, a little bit more information about their total spending in each age group. And it might be different demographic categories depending on the type of business. Let's see, I had another question. A comment, your SBDC advisor can access some of these databases as well. Yeah, that's a very good point. So they do have access to this at the KSBDC, and they can pull some of this data for you as well. But I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of what you might find, what to expect, and how that relates to your startup process. So another important thing, as I already mentioned, is that market share concentration. So this is an industry where it's a lot of small local businesses, so that market share concentration is really low. There's no major companies. And then it talks about what it actually does take to be successful. So again, we saw this in some of those example business plans. What are those barriers to entry? How are you structuring your cost? Profit, wages, those sorts of things. But I just really quickly wanted to pop into a different industry report here to show you what that would look like if there are a few major companies dominating that. So just as an example, this is footwear manufacturing. And if we go to major companies, then we can see that there are 3 major companies that are really dominating that landscape. So that can give you a sense of who is your major competition if you're going into an industry where there are major players. And it gives you information about exactly how much of the market each of those are have a share of, and their financial performance, and a lot more detail about those particular companies. And under competitive landscape, we have a chart here that's showing us those 3 major players dominate 47% of the industry, but minor small players still have 52%. So there is still an opportunity for small players to get at least a small share of that market. So all of that to me is really fascinating. Are there any questions, any other questions here before I move on to the next resource? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no. Perfect. So the next one I wanted to talk about is a database that is kind of the most comprehensive of all of the business research sources, Business Source Complete. And this is one that your local public library is going to have access to as well. So if you have a library card, you can access this from home through your public library. So this, again, you don't need to actually come into campus for this. And this one is really important because it has just so many different types of sources. So I'm just going to do a really broad general search to show you what's in here. But this is one where I would actually consult this probably first. When I'm working with business researchers, this is always my first go-to because it is so comprehensive. So we have 27,000 results. That's too much. But what I always will go down to do is look at the different types of sources because we have it all kind of mixed up here. But if I go to show more, we can break this down into the types of sources. So we have 225 industry profiles. This is going to be similar to what we were looking at in IBISWorld, but just broken down in a different way. And here we've got, this is a 90-page report, 89-page report, and these 2 are created by private research firms that all they do is collect this type of data. And if you go to Google and you just search for an industry report, a lot of times these will cost upwards of $1,000 a piece. So it's really powerful to be able to go through your library and get free access to these. So in the interest of time, I'm probably not going to open one of those up to show you, but they're often really current, and there's lots of pages of information similar to what we found in IBISWorld. And the other 2 things that are really useful in here, one are SWOT analyses. So when we're doing the company or competition research, SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if you're looking at kind of some of the major players who are your competition, opening these up will give you a really great breakdown of what are the opportunities and threats for similar businesses in your area. What kind of things might you want to consider as well? So we have just kind of a really quick breakdown of bullet points. What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What opportunities do they have, and what are their threats? And then a little bit more analysis of what that actually looks like for each company. So this is really helpful too when you're kind of looking at what sets you apart, what do you want to do differently, and what of those factors are going to be relevant to your business as well. And the other thing I definitely would recommend everyone look at within this business source database are trade publications. So we can filter for those as well. And these are publications that are coming out of each particular industry, their industry organization. So Food Engineering Magazine, PR Weekly in this case. But I always like to use the example of my uncle who's an alpaca farmer, and there is like Alpaca Farming Monthly magazine, which, you know, they can be really, really niche. And a lot of times in smaller industries, there's not going to be tons of data that's publicly available, but the industry association that works with that particular, you know, that exists for that industry, that's going to be where you get the most detailed and nuanced information. So sometimes looking up those particular publications can be really helpful to browse through and just see what is the news in this smaller industry. So that's all I'm going to bring up there. But industry associations can be really, really helpful. A lot of times, or at least sometimes, they will have free data on their website. Sometimes you do have to subscribe to the association. But here's a list from Wikipedia, which is actually really thorough. So I definitely would recommend for whatever your industry is, you can actually just Google the name of your industry and association, the word association, and see what organizations are serving that particular industry. But you can see from this list that there are a lot. They are really kind of niche, like American Christmas Tree Association. So this list is really helpful, or again, you can Google for it and go into their particular website and see if they have something called like a library or a data source dashboard. And you can find a lot of information that might not be available otherwise through industry associations. So I'm going to go back to my slides. Are there any other questions about industry research before I get into the competitive analysis side? Okay. So I just have a little bit to say on the competition analysis because I want to make sure we have time to talk about consumer research. I think that's the most fun part of it. But you're identifying the strategies that are used by your competition, their strengths, their weaknesses, relative to your own product or service. And some of the things that you're wanting to look at when you do competition analysis is who are the most similar, your direct competitors, because there's always going to be indirect competition as well. And that's important information, but especially when you're looking at business planning, you might want to focus on the, maybe 3 or 4 businesses that are most similar to yours to get that information. Stay targeted. As we saw in the plan, you only have a few opportunities to add data. You don't want to overwhelm who's ever looking at it either. So staying focused with it. What are their strengths and weaknesses? Maybe how the media is viewing their products and services could be an important thing to look at. What are their marketing strategies? And how can you develop something unique to stand out from that competition? So the business source complete that we just looked at, that would be where I might go to as well. The trade publications, the SWOT analysis, all of that's really relevant. So we already looked at that. If you're looking at publicly traded companies, there is the Edgar SIC, I think, website that has the financial information for publicly traded companies, which is really helpful. But what I wanted to look at is this database called Reference USA. This is a little bit more helpful if you are doing local, rural, smaller business, as well as the national level. And this is another one that the public library has, a really similar product called A to Z List. So again, you could access really similar information with your public libraries, with your public library card from home. And the KSBDC can help you with this research as well. I'm going to go into advanced search and just kind of show you what we can find here. So I'm going to search for my industry. So click on that and I can search by keyword, or also, as I mentioned, that NAICS, National Association of Industry Standards, if I know the number of my particular industry, which was helpful here because if I type in pets, it was actually not pulling up pet boarding because the official title is animal boarding, so you have to know the exact keyword. But I wrote down that code from IBISWorld, so I can put that in here and make sure I'm finding data on my specific industry. In this case, pet boarding, sitting in kennels. So I'm going to add that to my search. And then I'm interested in a specific geographic area. I usually do metro area, but you can search just by zip code, or you can search by city. And I'm going to add the Wichita Metro to my search here and update my count. And it's telling me there are 62 businesses operating in this particular industry. And I can take a look at what these are. So I think there's quite a bit of data in here, but what is the most helpful, if you click on a particular business, it will tell you how many employees they have operating at that particular location, as well as an estimation of their total sales volume at that particular location. So this can be a place where you can get data on how to benchmark how much you might expect to be able to bring in that particular industry and in that geographic area. So I think this is a somewhat larger business. So this one, yeah, has 4 employees and a little bit more revenue. So you can kind of get a sense of what's going on with your competition. And then also the heat map, which is helpful. You can get some information in Google, but not every small business is listed. Whereas in these databases, there are people who spend their whole day identifying and contacting businesses to get the most accurate data that they can. So especially if you're looking at a location-based business, you can see where your competition is located. And a lot of times they'll talk about doing like a ring study. So you want to say, if I was doing my business here, within 3 miles, within 5 miles, within 10 miles, how much competition is near me in that location. So you can kind of get a sense of, well, there's nobody out here, maybe there's a reason for that, or maybe that's a good place to start a business because there isn't a lot of competition. And then from there, you can go back into the data for that particular location. So that is a resource that I use a lot, especially with kind of smaller local businesses, but you can get a lot of information for larger corporations, whereas their parent company, that sort of thing from here as well. Okay. So I think with that, I'm going to move on to the consumer data side of it to make sure we have enough time for that. But any questions so far? Okay. Let me find the right slide. So I really like to talk about consumer data. I think this is the most fun when you're starting a business and you're thinking like, who's actually going to buy this? Who am I going to be interacting with as a customer? It's a really fun part of it, and a complex part of it as well. So I'm sorry. Here we go. So consumer research, we're looking at obviously who are the people in regards to demographic profiles, but also their preferences, their attitudes, their behavior. So looking at like maybe, does your target market want what's most convenient? Do they want what's least expensive? Are they looking more for quality than price? Figuring out those sorts of things as you're determining who exactly you want to sell to and how you're going to do that. So we're looking at a lot of times just sort of basic demographic segmentation. So the basics, their age, their gender, their race, income, education level, occupation, size of household, and where they live and work. But also the behavioral information, or in marketing, it's called psychographic data, their lifestyle. Where do they go? What do they do? What are they interested in? Their opinions. And as I mentioned, why do they buy certain products? What sort of needs do they want to satisfy? And what influences those decisions? So for demographic segmentation, one of the main places is the US Census data website, as well as the geographic information. And then for psychographic data, there are some free resources coming from the Bureau of Labor Statistics that I use a lot. One is the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is an ongoing survey from the United States that looks at what people spend their money on, broken down by these different demographic categories. And there's a similar one called the American Time Use Survey that looks at how do people spend their time? How much time do they spend caring for loved ones? How much time do they spend mowing the lawn? And breaking that down by different demographic categories. So depending on your business, you could kind of get a sense of what demographic groups are spending the money or spending their time in whatever you are trying to get into the business of. For the behavioral data, a lot of times that's where the primary market research comes in. You actually might have to go out and talk to those consumers, but through a lot of the data, you can at least figure out who you want to talk to and what questions you want to ask them. Okay. So back to my research guide here. There's a whole tab on consumer research. And I had a hard time figuring out where I want to start with this, with the demographic or more of the psychographic. But I think the psychographic is really important because you have to figure out who to sell to, and then you want to figure out how many of those people are in your area. So I'm going to go under the free website tab here. And we have links to the American Time Use Survey, American Expenditure Survey, which I did have pulled up here. So this is the American Expenditure Survey website. This again is free data. And we're looking at the publication tables where we can see by these different demographic categories what people are spending their money on. So I'm just going to open up the table for age of reference person. And along the top, we have people under 25 all the way up to people over 75. And as we scroll down, we can see all of these different product categories. So we've got a lot of different types of food, utilities, and then as we get down here, stationery, household products, small appliances, and we can follow this across to see which age groups are spending the most money on those types of products. We have apparel, transportation, and it just goes on and on. So this can be a really helpful way to get a sense of what demographic categories are the ones that are spending the most money on your particular industry. I have a question if the recording is going to be available. I do believe it's being recorded, but I am not the one who knows where or when that will be available. So I'll let our other panelists answer that. Okay. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. You can definitely slow me down, or as I mentioned, contact me after the presentation and we can go personally in a way that will work for your particular business, because I know I am covering a lot of resources in this presentation. So hopefully you are not getting too dizzy. But there's a couple more here. There's maybe 3 more resources I want to show you in the next few minutes here. So another one that I really appreciate a lot is a website called Esri Tapestry Segmentation. And this is also a free website, which always really surprises me because there's so much useful information here. So we're going to, in this case, do a zip code search. I'm just going to search for my zip code. And this is another one that's going to break down who's living in that area by lifestyle, by preferences. So we've got a map of Wichita here. And for each zip code in Wichita, it's showing us the type of people who live there. So we can just go to, downtown Wichita and come down here. And it's telling us that 76% of the people who live in that zip code are a type of consumer that they're classifying as young and restless. And if we go to look at more, it has information that they're well educated, they're working in professional and technical occupations, they mostly rent, phones and internet are a really important part of their life. 22% of people are the set to impress group, which are young, still in college, image conscious, they buy clothes, they are into music. So we've got on one side their median income, their age, but this is where we're really getting some interesting data on who they are, what motivates them, what they're interested in. And if we go to click for more details, it actually will give us a several page report on that particular type of consumer, where they are geographically in the United States, socioeconomic traits, what type of neighborhood they live in, and then breaking down other demographic data like income, race, budget. There's just a whole lot of information here. So that is one of the best sources that I know of for getting at that psychographic information. Who's living here? What type of person are they? And how do I market to them? And for each zip code, we're going to get different information here. So I'm really fond of this website, and I find it really helpful. Okay. So similar to that is a website called Policy Map. This is going to be more for the demographic information. Once you kind of determine who your customers are, then you might want to figure out where they're living, something like that. So again, we have a map of all of Wichita broken down even to smaller segments here. And then all of these different demographic categories, their income, housing, quality of life even has things about, where different restaurants are located, grocery stores, access to public transportation. So depending on your business, different aspects will be really important. But we might be able to just look at income, household income by race and ethnicity. Let's just look at all households. So it could really quickly visually show you where people in those demographic categories are living. So we can see in the center, this kind of goes with some of the psychographic information that we saw. It makes sense looking at where the income is distributed, as well as, we can see that there's more income around the outside of town. And then we can look at that kind of based on, you compare that to where people of different ages are living, 18 to 20. Kind of interesting how, to what extent those overlap or don't, and you can kind of analyze where your target market is located or where you might want to put your advertising focus, locate a business, and we can zoom out here and really look at the whole United States. So if you're not, tied to Wichita, if you're looking at having a more nationally oriented business, this is for age group. It's always kind of interesting to look at this on income as well, to kind of see, where in the United States are people with the most income and the least income, and you can really quickly get a sense of where you want to target different things. So I find that really helpful because I'm a visual person. Most of that data is coming from the US Census Bureau. So if you are more into the tables and the data itself, the census data website is definitely where you want to go. So if we look up Wichita, city of Wichita here, we get this really great data dashboard that'll break down all of that demographic information in a numerical format as well. So if you want that detailed information, this is the dashboard for Wichita, and we can see age and sex, where people are born, what languages they speak, their occupation, where they went to school, what they studied in school, how high their education level is, all of those different pieces of information for a specific geographic area are housed within the census data. So a lot of the other sources we looked at are pulling that data from here. I personally think that some of the visual ways of interacting with that data are a little bit more useful though. So actually, for my notes here, it looks like that was mostly what I wanted to talk to you about. Usually I go over, so I was trying to kind of pare it down today. So let me turn it over to you and see what questions you guys have. Marcia says, hoping to send out the recording next week, so that's helpful to you. And let me put my contact information in the chat again, because I am really happy to work with each of you to be a little bit more specific on your research needs. And of course, again, the KSBDC can help you with a lot of this as well. So, too much? Everyone's shocked into silence? From Barrett, assuming that these resources can see international data as well. Some of them definitely. IBIS World is more United States focused, but they do have a global data center with some of the larger industries. And the Business Source Complete, the database that was really comprehensive, that one has a lot of the same information on the international level as well. I know for us at Wichita State, we have more of a focus on US business, so that's where more of our resources are located. But a lot of these will have international data. And if you're looking to start an international company, that's definitely something we can talk about, some of those more specific sources for international data, as well as the US government has a lot of those as well. So I know I actually have a whole research guide. I can put a link in the chat for international business. There's some really helpful government agencies that have data that I'm forgetting the names of right now. Publicly available as information pertaining to how much of a specific good is imported. That should be pretty well available from, I'm forgetting the name of the agency that is in charge of that. There's two main government agencies that are in charge of trade and foreign entry into foreign markets. And they have quite a lot of information. Let me see if I can pull this up really quickly. Here we go. Now I don't have the chat open. Let's see. Well, I'm not finding it right when I need it. But that is definitely something we could talk about as well. So that's a really good question. And I don't know to what extent the KSBDC works with international businesses. I assume that you work with US and international data as well. But when it comes to imports and exports, there is quite a bit of data available. Any other questions? Marcia says, we do help with international business and connect with resources at the state and federal level. So yeah, a lot of the data would be coming more from federal sources when it comes to international business, as far as I'm aware. And that's wonderful because those are publicly available data sources. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, I really appreciate everyone spending an hour on your lunch break with me today. I'm definitely here for more questions and more support as things come up. Some of this was helpful to you to kind of just give you a sense of what information to look for and what information is out there. Because a lot of times I just feel like if you don't know the questions to ask and you don't know the resources that might be available, then you kind of don't know where to start. So I hope this at least gave you kind of an overview of where you might want to start and how you might go about that process. Anything else from the SBDC, from Mindy or Marcia?
I don't have anything to say, but if there are any more last minute questions, I'm sure Megan would be happy to answer them. If not, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. All right, perfect. Marcia, thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoy these presentations, so hopefully it was useful. And I can definitely tailor more in the future, so I'm always happy to come back and work with you guys again. Thank you.